At 4:40 in the afternoon on Saturday, March 25, 1911, 500 workers at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory in New York City were preparing to go home. It was the end of a 52-hour work week. Most of them were young women. Most of them were recent immigrants. Many were still teenagers. At 4:40, a fire started in a scrap bin on the 8th floor. Within minutes, it had spread to the 9th. Workers rushed to the exits. The stairwell door on the Washington Place side of the 9th floor was locked. It had been locked from the outside. Every day, during every shift, by management. The owners locked the doors to prevent workers from leaving early, taking unauthorized breaks, or stealing fabric scraps. The fire escape was too narrow to hold the weight of the crowd rushing onto it. It buckled and collapsed. The fire ladders sent by the New York City Fire Department could only reach the 6th floor. The fire was on the 8th, 9th, and 10th floors. 146 people died in 18 minutes. Most of them on the 9th floor. Most of them because of a locked door. The owners of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory were arrested and charged with manslaughter. 9 months later, a jury acquitted them. Their insurance company paid them $400 for every worker who died. They walked away with a profit of $60,000. 2 years later, one of them was arrested again for locking the doors at his next factory. He was fined $20. New York City in 1911 was the garment capital of the world. The ready-made clothing industry had exploded in the decades following the Civil War, and by the early 1900s, Manhattan's Lower East Side was packed with factories producing shirts, blouses, dresses, and coats for a rapidly growing consumer market. The Triangle Waist Company was one of the largest of these operations. It occupied the 8th, 9th, and 10th floors of the 10-story Ash building at the corner of Green Street and Washington Place in Greenwich Village. The owners were Max Blanck and Isaac Harris, both Jewish immigrants who had built a profitable business on the labor of workers just like themselves. The factory normally employed around 500 workers. Almost all of them were women and girls. Almost all of them were recent immigrants from Italy, Russia, Poland, and other parts of Eastern Europe. They ranged in age from 13 to their mid-20s. They worked 9 hours a day on weekdays and 7 hours on Saturdays. 52 hours a week. They were paid between $7 and $12 for that week. The owners had a specific preference for hiring young immigrant women. They worked for less than men. They were less likely to organize. They had few alternatives. The conditions inside the factory were what reformers of the era called a sweatshop. Long rows of sewing machines packed close together. Fabric scraps piled on the floor and under the tables. Poor ventilation. Exits that were routinely locked during working hours. The owners kept the doors locked for 2 reasons: to prevent workers from leaving early, and to prevent union organizers from entering. The workers had tried to change these conditions. In 1909, workers across the shirtwaist industry had gone on strike in what became known as the Uprising of the 20,000. The Triangle workers were among the strikers. They had demanded unlocked doors. They had demanded functioning fire escapes. They had demanded union recognition. The strike eventually ended. Most factories agreed to some of the demands. Triangle did not. The workers went back to work without a union agreement. The doors stayed locked. 18 months later, the factory caught fire. The fire started at 4:40 in the afternoon on the 8th floor. A match or a cigarette, the exact source was never conclusively determined, came into contact with the fabric scraps piled under a cutting table. The 8th floor was packed with material. Thousands of pounds of cotton fabric. Tissue paper patterns hanging from the ceiling. Barrels of oil used to lubricate the machines. The fire spread with terrifying speed. A bookkeeper on the 10th floor called upstairs to warn the workers there. Most of the 10th floor, including owners Blanck and Harris, escaped to the roof and then to an adjacent building. The 8th floor also largely evacuated in time. The 9th floor did not. There were approximately 250 workers on the 9th floor when the fire reached it. They rushed to the exits. The Green Street stairway was blocked by flames rising from the 8th floor. The Washington Place stairway door was locked. A worker named Louis Levin managed to find the supervisor who had a key. By the time the door was opened, the stairwell was already filling with smoke. Some workers made it through. Many did not. The 2 passenger elevators ran until the heat made it impossible to continue. Elevator operator Joseph Zito later said he made trip after trip, cramming as many workers as he could into each car, until the cables threatened to give way and workers began climbing down them. The fire escape filled instantly. It was designed for orderly single-file evacuation, not for 250 panicked workers. The metal structure buckled under the weight and heat. It collapsed, throwing the workers on it to the street below. The firefighters arrived quickly. Their ladders reached the 6th floor. The fire was 4 floors above them. They watched. They could do nothing else. Workers on the 9th floor who could not reach an exit went to the windows. They stood on the ledge, looking down at the crowd gathering on the street below. And then they jumped. An eyewitness reporter named William Shepard was on the scene and wrote what he saw. He wrote that he learned a new sound that afternoon. The sound of a body hitting the pavement. He counted 62 people who jumped. The bodies of the jumpers fell on the fire hoses. Firefighters had to move them to begin fighting the fire. In 18 minutes, it was over. 146 people were dead. 123 of them were women and girls. The youngest victim was 14 years old. The investigation that followed found what everyone who had worked in the building already knew. The Washington Place door on the 9th floor had been locked. It had been locked deliberately. Every day. As a matter of policy. The factory had 1 fire escape. The law required 3. The stairwell doors opened inward instead of outward, making them nearly impossible to push open when a crowd pressed against them from the inside. The building had passed a routine fire inspection 1 month before a similar factory fire in Newark, New Jersey in 1910 had killed 25 workers. A report published 9 days before the Triangle fire stated that most New York sweatshops lacked even the most indispensable precautions necessary for worker safety. The Triangle factory was not unusual. It was typical. The conditions that killed 146 people on March 25, 1911, existed in hundreds of factories across New York City. The chairman of the city's Fire Prevention Committee testified 2 days after the fire that there were hundreds of thousands of buildings in the same condition. He had known this before the fire. The city had known this before the fire. Nobody had acted. Max Blanck and Isaac Harris were arrested and charged with 1st and 2nd-degree manslaughter in April of 1911. Their trial began on December 4th. The prosecution's case rested on proving that the owners knew the Washington Place door was locked at the time of the fire. Survivors testified. A worker named Kate Alterman described reaching the locked door and watching her friend burn. The defense attorney, Max Stewart, cross-examined her repeatedly. He asked her to tell her story again and again. Each time she told it the same way, with the same words, in the same order. Stewart argued to the jury that she had memorized her testimony, that she had been coached, that her account could not be trusted. The jury deliberated. On December 27, 1911, 9 months after the fire, the jury returned a verdict. Not guilty. The prosecution had failed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the owners knew the door was locked at the moment the fire broke out. In civil suits that followed, the owners agreed to pay damages to 23 of the victims' families. The amount was $75 per life. Their insurance company paid them $400 per victim. They collected $60,000. They had profited from the deaths of their workers. In 1913, Max Blanck was arrested again. He had opened a new factory. The exit doors were locked. He was fined $20. The public response to the Triangle fire was unlike anything New York had seen. 2 days after the fire, 100,000 people marched in a funeral procession along Fifth Avenue behind the hearses carrying the dead. A week after the fire, a meeting at the Metropolitan Opera House drew people of every background demanding action on fire safety. 3 months later, New York's governor signed legislation creating the Factory Investigating Commission. It had unprecedented power to inspect factories and mandate safety improvements. Over the next 4 years, the commission investigated conditions across New York State and produced 36 new labor laws. Mandatory fire drills, sprinkler systems in high-rise factories, doors that opened outward, unlocked exits during working hours, limits on working hours for women and children. Francis Perkins, who witnessed workers jumping from the windows of the Triangle factory that afternoon, served on the committee that established the Factory Investigating Commission. She would later become Franklin Roosevelt's Secretary of Labor and was the primary architect of the New Deal's labor protections, including the Social Security Act and the Fair Labor Standards Act. She said the New Deal began on the sidewalk outside the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, created in 1970, traces its origins directly to the reforms that came from the Triangle fire. Every workplace safety law in America, every requirement for unlocked exit doors, every mandatory fire drill, every sprinkler system, built on the deaths of 146 workers who could not get out of a burning building because the door was locked from the outside. On March 25, 1911, 500 workers went to work at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. Most of them were young women. Most of them were immigrants. Many of them had gone on strike 2 years earlier, demanding unlocked doors and functioning fire escapes. They had been ignored. They went back to work. On the afternoon of March 25th, a fire started in a scrap bin. The door was locked. The fire escape collapsed. The ladders did not reach. 146 people died in 18 minutes. The owners were acquitted. They collected their insurance money. One of them was arrested again 2 years later for locking the doors at his next factory. He was fined $20. The workers who jumped from the windows of the 9th floor that afternoon had names: Rosie Grasso, Bessie Gabrilowicz, Jenny Stellino, Della Costello, Circa Brenman. Most of them were never publicly identified. 6 of the victims were not identified at all until a genealogist found their names 100 years later in 2011. They are buried together under a single monument in a New York City cemetery. It is now part of New York University's campus. A plaque on the outside of the building marks what happened there. The door that was locked on the 9th floor no longer exists, but the laws that door created are still in force. Every unlocked exit in every building in America, every door that opens outward, paid for in advance, on a Saturday afternoon in March, by people who only wanted to go home. Did you know the owners were acquitted and actually profited from the fire? And do you think justice was ever served? Tell me below.